Welcome back, everybody, to Titans Up Today, episode 40. We have Vella with us, just like Fella. Roy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jacob.
So one of the things that moves me about you in particular is as you look into what you've accomplished, the things that you've done, the word polymath emerges. And polymaths, at least as I've seen them, it almost seems like a lost art. They definitely do exist, but back in the day, right, back in the Da Vinci days, polymath was
Sure.
a very specific thing, and it seemed like there was a lot more polymaths. So you would get guys who were good at art, but then they were also doctors and whatnot. So curious in your take on that.
Okay, so that was way more possible, right? As we've specialized as a culture, there's no way you can go to the bottom of the pool and everything. When being a doctor meant bloodletting, that was a pretty easy thing. There's only anyway, I'm not downgrading Michelangelo or Da Vinci or any other polymath, Benjamin Franklin. There are amazing people who you would call a polymath who dove to the bottom of the pool on a lot of subjects, but the pool was much more shallow at the time, and that's for sure. I think also education was very different, right? At the moment, a lot of people have gone through life thinking that like what they learn in school is what they need to know and may not have explored beyond that or had the opportunity to explore beyond that. I actually think polymathism is going to have more of an explosion now because there's not only the internet, obviously, but AI that you can just have a conversation about pretty much any topic at any level that you want all the time, right? But at the end of it, it's also a personality thing. I'm just insatiably curious. I often have conversations with people, and the call is coming to an end because we've used our hour, and they go, "Oh God, wait, what just happened? I don't know anything about you. You just interrogated me," and I'm like, "I'm sorry." Like I often do that. I'm an inquisitor, and I'm curious, and I think people are fascinating. I also feel like there's always more to learn. I'm happy to talk to anybody because they have a lens on life that is not my lens. They were born someplace else, raised someplace else. They have a different age than me, a different gender than me, a different native language than me, like blah, blah, blah. Like you name it. There's one me and one them, and they have something to teach me. I often say to people, if I don't learn something during our call from you, that's on me. That's not asking the right questions. That's or thinking that everything, which is just silly because there's just so much more to learn. And also it's the eagerness to explore, right? I've been reading, there's a magazine called Science News, and it's over 150 years old. I'm not exactly sure how old. And it used to be called Science Newsletter, and it covers all of science, geology, astrophysics, biology, like you name it, but in a very short form. So like it's 16 to 18 pages. They do quarter page, half page. They do two big articles of 4 to 6 pages. My favorite thing they do is a 50 years ago article. So they're that old, right? So they republish something they published 50 years ago, and then they say, here's where we are now. And I love that magazine. I've been reading it for 30 years, like easy. And I just think it's great and it's fabulous. And my wife likes to joke around that I'm like an inch deep, but a mile wide. Like can talk to any scientist pretty impressively for about 15 minutes. And then I'm gonna hit the edge of everything about what they're working on. But when I hit the edge of what I know, the conversation never stops because I'm like, so by the way, so then does that mean, so what are you now? Wait, your PhD is on, I'm constantly trying to connect the dots. I think the cross fertilization is where innovation and creativity and the fun is, right? That's the interesting stuff for me.
Exactly. And yeah, I had a similar thought to you about the increase in specialization, the increase in standards about what it means to be a doctor and how schooling has changed, right? How this
Yeah.
person has a degree for this and now they're trusted and accredited. And if you don't go through that process, then you can't be this. So we've added some of those barriers. Whereas before, somebody could pick up and say they can mess around with some chemistry and they can go and do some machining. And they're like, and then you see the article of him in the news and it just shows he's an entrepreneur, chemist, manufacturer, right? And it's
Yeah.
artist, all these wonderful things.
Yeah. And again, it's also, we may have the impression of more polymaths in the past, but those are the ones, the vast majority of people didn't have access. At the moment, that's the miracle. I tell my teenagers, you have all of human knowledge at your fingertips. That's nuts. Like you can literally go to the bottom of the pool on any topic you want. And that is not a thing that was possible in the past. Just access to books. We live in a miraculous time in that regard. Anyone can be a polymath and pick up a book or watch a video now or go to Khan Academy and learn whatever topic you want. It's all knowledge is universal, accessible, and basically free. You need a web access. Many, or I can't say most, many people have that access. So it's incredible in that regard.
In a lot of ways in life, it's what we take advantage of. Because if we look at there's like a core principle or purpose driving the Titans of Today podcast, and that's that a single conversation can transform your life. So you can talk to someone like Roy and he can enlighten you or give you some understanding about something or some wisdom, something you've experienced. That person goes, oh my, I now see what I should do.
Yeah, totally.
If we're willing to take those things up. But I think you're absolutely right. You could pull up your phone now and have a conversation with ChatGPT and just go and go. So that has changed.
Yeah. And at any level. That's the thing I think people miss about AI right now is that we can get into AI if you want, but at the end of the day, it can be whoever you want it to be. So you can say to any of the bots, I have a PhD in particle astrophysics and I want to discuss quantum mechanics. Oh, and you're Einstein. No problem. It can, you and I might not follow the conversation, but ChatGPT can certainly have it. There's plenty of written about what Einstein believed and thought and felt about quantum mechanics. And it can engage in that conversation. If you don't do that, you end up talking to the mean. And the mean, by definition, has an IQ of 100. It's not going to be as impressive as what Einstein might have said.
So we're going to get into that actually. And sure. That something underpinning it, you said insatiably curious, but also asking the right questions. But I want to go even further back and just help people understand more about who you are and your entrepreneurial background, having led projects with PayPal and Royal Bank of Scotland. And then now you're CEO of NextCollabs and everything you're working on. When you look back in your career and how you've climbed up, how important was asking the right questions and who you should be asking the questions to, and really what allowed you to climb up to have the level of success? Because I think what blocks a lot of people is if they just don't engage with the right person or at a particular organization, or they just allow themselves to be subdued to the politics. So I'm curious about your take on that, having someone who's navigated it successfully and become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I would say anyone can be an entrepreneur, but there is a hunger, right? My brother and I in high school made a driveway paving company. Like you do it early on just because, and it's interesting and challenging, and it's really about enjoying the challenge, right? That difficult things and hard things are worth your time and effort, and they're fun. That it's not enjoying pain per se, but it's because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Being hard is okay. And starting I tell people all the time, especially younger generation, like your risk profile starts at its peak and is declining over time. Like the younger you are, the more able you are to take risks, right? You have less bills, less responsibilities. When it's just you and you're alone, you have only one mouth to feed, right? And then you might match up with another independent. So it's two independents. And then you might have a dependent show up and blah, blah, blah. It gets more and more complicated over time. But at the end of the day, it's that insatiable desire to solve problems, right? And it's also the people, I say the entrepreneurs are the people who see a problem and solve it, right? They don't see a problem and wait for someone else to solve it. It's the people, and that's the people I want to hire. It's a great test in an interview to put a piece of paper on the floor, like a balled up piece of paper on the floor, and see if the person walks in, picks it up and throws it in the bin. That's right there. There's a bin, there's a paper. Like the person I want to hire walks in, sees the paper, picks it up, throws it, and then sits down. Again, it's an inherent thing almost. There's very few people who go down the path of entrepreneurship and creativity and problem solving who have ever even thought that's not my job. That's not a thing. Like we're just trying to, the team are trying to get over there, and anything needs to do, it gets done. Again, everything has its balance, right? You can't have everyone trying to do everything. If there's someone doing the job, you don't butt in, blah, blah, blah. But if something needs doing, you do it, right? There's that attitude. And it's a bit of grit. It's a bit of enjoyment and challenge. It's a bit of exploration. And then you said talking to the right person. That's really hard to predict. So my advice is often talk to everybody. If you see someone doing something that you're like, I don't know how to do that and I need to, ask them. People love to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. Throughout life, as a young, right out of undergrad, I was constantly quizzing people. I'm like, how'd you do that? Wait, what's that? Like, oh, why'd you do that? Why'd you make that decision? I understand what you did, but why? I don't, the why doesn't make sense to me. And by the way, different things, you get the why, but you don't get the how, or you get the how and the why, but you don't get the what. Wait, what did you just do? Something happened on the screen that I don't follow, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And that's the other thing I would say, the being an experimenter, right? So I have never in my life approached anything, a machine, anything physical, anything digital, a new piece of software, and thought, I don't know how to use that, so I'm not going to touch it. I'm touching, I'm like grabbing, I'm pulling levers, like it's about trial and error and learning on the go. And again, my wife teases me because I have my level ones of everything. I have my private pilot's license. I have hang gliding. I did skydiving. I've done scuba diving. I've done, you name it. And why? Because I'm curious. I don't know how to do that. And I feel like I should know how to do that, or I want to know how to do that. Once I know how to do it, I go, okay. And my wife likes to joke around. She said, once you feel that you could be good at it or proficient at it, you're on to the next thing. There's actually a word for it. It's called an epicure.
Mm.
Epicure. And an epicure that's a good definition for me. I'm a try as you go and try and learn. And I love it. I love learning new things and seeing things through other people's perspectives and understanding how things work. I'm constantly taking things apart. And my family writ large jokes around that, like, I break a lot of things, but I fix a lot of things.
You have to break things to fix them in many cases in our lives.
I know.
Like,
And there's this underpinning, I don't feel like you can break things. Like, if you break it, you'll fix it. But the only way to learn how to use it is by using it.
So to take that, it's to really navigate your way to a point of being an entrepreneur. It's more of just how you operate in everyday life to find the answer, find the solution, create it, understand it. And as you do that over and over again, you're going to climb up in the corporate world. You're going to climb up as an entrepreneur and position yourself as someone who is an authority. But you have to have some of that insatiable curiosity and just, I would say, the lack of limitation. It's not like there's no limits, but other people are like, I should only do this. Right. I just need to sit inside my bubble here instead of being like, oh, how does that work? Because in reality, knowing how that works usually helps you be better at that thing or achieve the success in your role because you need to work with that person who's running that thing over there.
Right. And at the end of the day, there's piles of acronyms in the business world with the GST, just get shit done. Like, the people who get shit done are the ones who, on their way in, didn't miss a beat, picked up the thing, tossed it in the bin, sat down for their interview, right? Like, just that GSD approach, I think, is really important, right? And it's, again, that's my style. I would also say finding your personal approach and style is important, right? There's a book called Range by David Epstein that I just love. And that's because it defines me. I am a range guy. I like to do a bunch of different things. There are other people who like to focus, like, this is what I do. And a range person might not be first violin in the orchestra because they didn't dedicate the time and effort, but you never know. In the book, they talk about sports and how both range and focus. And they talk about, there's a big section around tennis, and Nadal and Federer had very different approaches. Nadal was tennis like from birth, and Federer did a whole huge range of sports and then went into professional tennis when he entered. He was doing a whole bunch of other things. He was doing baseball and basketball and blah, blah, blah. He was an all around sports person, and then decided that he really enjoyed tennis and focused on it, but focused on it late is my point, post college. Again, your personal style and and that's, I would say, a very important thing. If you're going to be an entrepreneur or polymath or whatever you are, it's what works for you. Right? Is it reading? Is it physical knowledge? Is it listening? Everybody's different. Everyone has a different style.
So Nadal and Federer in that example of sports, do you think that the common factor is that they decided to fully focus on it at some point? Or because they both became the best in the world is what I'm saying. So you couldn't necessarily say that one was better than the other
and that's the point in the book. The book is called Range, and being an epicure is not necessarily, and in the book is a counterpoint. I think I have it. Yeah, I have it right. What's the subtitle? Why generalists triumph in a specialist world. And the reason he wrote the book is that there's this principle of that specialization is the way to go. And in fact, I alluded to it in the beginning. Oh, our knowledge is so deep in so many areas. You got to specialize. You want to be there's a neurosurgeon of this part of the brain. Like, that neurosurgeon doesn't work on this part. So there's subspecialties, and we have this impression in the modern age that to be world class, whatever that means, at something, you must specialize. And what Epstein writes is sometimes depends on what it is, depends on who you are, depends on how you learn and how you play and blah, blah, blah. So the point is that there isn't one answer. And you're right. That's exactly what you said. Is exactly right. They're both world class. They're playing each other on the court, two completely different ways. Federer couldn't have done it in Nadal's way because he'd been bored out of his mind. He would have tossed in the racket long ago. It's what are you defining? Are you becoming a world class tennis player, or are you becoming a world class athlete? It's two different approaches, maybe, right? And it's also why world class athletes can sometimes jump around. Michael Jordan, I don't know if you know, Michael Jordan jumped into baseball at the end of his career. He's like, what? Anyway.
So what are you optimizing for then? Being a polymathic Epicurean as you are, and what are you, what is that optimization question that you're working towards, and how is that formed?
So I tend to be on that convergence of humanity, technology, and science. So I just love that convergence point, which tends to lead me to the bleeding edge technology. So I started a fintech out of grad school, which at the time fintech was a new thing. It wasn't even really called that. It wasn't SaaS. It was called application service provider. That's what we did in the early days, the late 90s, early days of the web. So the early days of the web, the early days of fintech, then the early days of online payments. Then I ended up in the mobile world because payments went into the device. All of a sudden, the smartphone exploded, and I was focused in that area. Then smart home and IoT as the internet and the web penetrated more deeply into our environment. And now AI, right? I mean, I love the bleeding edge. And it tends to be because I'm on the bleeding edge. I just want in the surfing, I like to be on the tip of the wave. And AI at the moment is clearly the next massive wave.
And as you were going throughout your life and even today, do you think that, because I would say I'm like on the earlier stage of perhaps a similar journey, right? So I'm 28, and I got into entrepreneurship full time. I'd done some things when I was younger, full time when I was 23. And at that point, it was because of AI, what I could see was happening in AI. So this actually was over 2018, so maybe whatever times.
Yeah.
But 2018-ish, I was in a job and I realized that AI was going to be able to replace that. And then so I went in and I was like, I want to learn about AI and be in that market. And then so I did that. And then blockchain came about and I said, I want to learn that. And then AI really hit the field. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm back in this. But did you ever notice or think upon your life that you want it to be earlier in any of these cases or deeper in any of these cases? I just think it'd be a really interesting thing for people to learn, because there's a story in here of, did you ever feel you were reacting to the new things that were coming instead of being in the underpinning? Or do you think that the journey that you've been on has been the one where you got the most out of what you're able to do?
Yeah, by any measure, I fall into the early adopter, I'm at the innovator edge of the wave. I'm not at the inventor edge of the wave. I'm not trying to create the new thing usually. I'm usually trying to say, okay, how does that apply to life, to real life, to regular people? The other thing is you can be too early. And surfing is a great analogy. If you've ever been on a surfboard, if you paddle in too soon, the wave's going to crash on you. And I have had that happen to me, both in surfing and life. And if you paddle in too late, right? So surfing is a good analogy for it. And it takes time and experience to understand when to start paddling. You don't want to run out of gas, and how hard to paddle. And then when you can actually stop paddling and stand up, because now you're going down the wave, right? And my first startup out of grad school, we were basically QuickBooks Online about 5 years before QuickBooks went online. And we were about 4 years early. It was too early. People were like, you want to put my accounting online? That's nuts. Because in that world where online was a new thing, they're like, you want me to publish my internal books? No. And I'm like, no, it's not publishing. You're having to explain too many parts of it. Right. So it is possible to be early. Right. And AI is a fantastic example. We've had AI for 50, 60 years, give or take, in various forms. And there are two AIs. There's that AI, data science, machine learning, natural language processing. It's been happening for half a century or so. And then LLMs, right? LLMs are the latest instantiation. Most people today, when they say AI, they mean LLMs. But LLMs isn't all of AI. It's a small part, and it's fascinating because it speaks English really well on almost any topic you want to discuss. So it's impressive. So if you were deep in AI, even 10 years ago, you were in a backwater. OpenAI was a nonprofit lab with a few people in it that was being funded by the generosity of a few people in the Valley who made money.
About 8 years or so, right? 2014-ish to 2022, where they finally hit their moment.
So it's all relative, right? You can be early.
Yeah.
And even commercializing things. I often tell people it's not, in my experience so far, it's about execution more than it is anything else. So when I joined PayPal after I sold my startup, when that got acquired, I was recruited into PayPal by a classmate. There were 13 PayPal, like carbon copies, and not little guys. Citibank had C2 it, Yahoo had PayDirect, eBay had BillPoint. There was a list of large brands who were PayPal carbon copy functionality. So why did PayPal win? Out executed, just ruthless, and for a variety of reasons. We knew we were racing to an elbow, and we were doing everything to get to that elbow. And it was a free for all. The biggest deal that I did at PayPal, I was too junior at the time to sign, so my VP had to sign it. The day of the signing, my VP's, okay, so tell me what this deal is again. Like, it was a huge. The deal, when it was announced, it moved eBay stock 5%. It was a huge deal. But the guy who signed it was like, okay, what have you been working on? Tell me again how it worked. Like, yeah,
You just execute.
it was just execute. And honestly, it was a little fast and loose. PayPal, especially in the early days, was operating without a license. Like, you had to either have a banking license, which covered you federally, or if you didn't, which we didn't, you had to have money transfer licenses in each state. We did not have money, like, not even. And it reached a point where there were a bunch of attorneys general who were like, people are going to go to prison. And that was when, oh shit, okay, we'll get. So a little fast and loose with the law, while others were busy getting their licenses. We were just operating,
Exactly.
fixing it later.
And that does happen to so many different technologies. And I want to get to that. And also, you mentioned regulation and innovation. That's a whole different subject. A lot of things we have here on our outline. But in essence, at the heart of it, it's to reflect on a personal example is right now building this content engine, the podcast. And it's because if you build this, you build the following, and from the following, you can do a lot, because the following is distribution. You build, and you're building relationships, you're building networks, and those things are valuable. And because in the real, as human beings, we can only focus on one thing at a time. So we're out here, and it's like, hey, it seems like this is stupid or whatever. I'm going to go learn about this super niche technology, or I'm going to go start a channel, or I'm going to go do these things. They seem like these tiny little things that aren't, but they compound and grow just by execution. And all of a sudden you built something, a valuable asset that makes the rest of your life easier. So in the context of what you're saying, that's a very great answer as well, is that you can be too early, and really you should be thinking about how you're translating it, because chances are you probably won't be on the inventor level. Just some guy figured out, for example, I think Google is probably a good example. Like, they didn't invent all of the technologies that underpin what they did, but they figured out a good way to sort and utilize data that was just on top of that. And that translated to the value to the person. And that's where all the money was created.
The large language model as a core technology came out of a Google paper. That was and again, so the core discovery is not always the way it manifests. Satoshi's paper, I was a math major undergrad. I read the paper. I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to do accounting. You didn't necessarily know that Bitcoin or any other coin, or the whole phenomenon of meme coins and blah, 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 or NFTs, like blockchain is still it's an interesting technology that you wouldn't predict necessarily from the paper that suggested it.
But as long as you're in that innovation cycle, you're executing, you're looking to create value, you're going to come out on top. It's a good point. Good takeaway.
And figure out, I'm a huge fan of just collaboration, right? Like I think the people who tend to miss out think that the world is just deeply competitive and that they can't collaborate. Again, the biggest deal that I did that I mentioned at PayPal was a company called Payment Tech, was basically doing credit card processing online. Didn't really have a front end. People who used Payment Tech didn't know they were using Payment Tech. They were coming at it from the merchant side. PayPal, you had a PayPal account, and it was much more of a consumer play, even though there were merchant processing that was happening. But PayPal acted across the spectrum. Payment Tech was pretty vertical and deep. There were people at Payment Tech and people at PayPal that thought we shouldn't be talking.
Yeah.
But me and Kevin Gallagher were like, no, this is a huge, you focus on that, we focus on that. This is massive leverage for both of us as
Leverage.
young, accelerating. Yeah. And so that, I call that co-opetition. Were we competitors? We were also cooperating. There was room for both.
And the
And there
example,
tends to be room for both.
exactly. And examples of that still exist for that. That's how I've gotten a lot of my success in business is seeing that, wait, that person, that company's really good at this, but they don't have that. And it's like, all right, guys, we need to come together, have a conversation and get it figured out.
And it's also, and I think it applies personally as well, is recognize what you're good at
Hmm.
and what you want to do. I'll give you another great example. There's a company called TransferWise. They're now just called Wise. That is a money transfer operator. The two guys who started it, I knew them in the early days in London. They were Skype guys. They wanted to use the same core technology that they used for Skype, but use it for money. And the principle was really simple. Jacob wants euros. Roy has dollars. We're going to connect them. They're going to know each other's name, and we're just going to take a buck for each transaction. They did that for about 6 months. And all of a sudden they were like, this is a nightmare. We have to have regulatory status and bank accounts for every corridor that we do. So all of a sudden we got a guy in Mali who wants to transact with Egypt. We need bank accounts and regulatory stuff. Like they were like, we don't. And so basically they found a company that's called Currency Cloud that most people have never heard of. Currency Cloud does not face consumers. TransferWise does apps, marketing, and customer service and support. That's what they do. As soon as the money comes in and goes out, that's Currency Cloud. Currency Cloud is full back end. TransferWise is full front end. Currency Cloud is huge. They do that for a ton of front ends. Anyone who wants to put up a money transfer app and go collect customers for them, great. Currency Cloud, zero marketing budget. They don't do marketing. You can't call them. You don't know they exist. So again, and I bring it up because if you said money transfer, they're both in money transfer. But they're not competitive at all. They're completely collaborative because they're doing separate parts of the value chain and they leverage each other.
And that is a great segue here. You mentioned collaboration, and now we're in this age of AI. And in our initial conversation, I know that so many people deal with this because this is something that I just personally have felt the change of going to this digital world. Before you're in person, you're shaking hands, you're on the phone, but now you're collaborating digitally. Most people are not in an office. Business has changed in that sense. AI is here now. We're not only collaborating with humans in this digital way, but also this AI. Open us up on some of that and how the last few years since COVID have changed things and where your outlook is on how business and future of collaboration, if you will.
Yeah, now you're getting straight into NextCollabs. So we're named NextCollabs because of exactly that, because collaboration is essential. And a collab for us it's really convergence of both trends that you were talking about. So remote work, that a huge majority of meetings now are happening like this in little boxes, and AI. And so you have a meeting that has local humans, remote humans, and AI in a space. And that enables a level of collaboration and integration and information transparency that's just unprecedented. And so NextCollabs, what we're doing is really, it's meeting effectiveness, right? It's productivity in an enterprise environment where all of a sudden I know I can give you levels of transparency you couldn't get otherwise. Was there an agenda for the meeting? Did the content of the meeting match the agenda? Did the output of the meeting match the content and the agenda? Did the entire meeting align with our corporate strategy? Up and down the value chain, all of a sudden, the CEO can say, how often do we meet? Are meets on topic? How much of our stuff is in the Eisenhower important urgent quadrant versus someplace else? There's just low. And by the way, the other direction, line staff can look up and say, what's the executive team worried about? What are they discussing? What are the key themes? And there's all sorts of ability to mine this massive pile of unstructured data that you just couldn't do otherwise. And collaboration is really the name of the game moving forward. And by the way, it's global in real time, right? You'll have a call with half a dozen or a dozen people or more, and everyone's in their own country, right? And we're going to reach a point where it doesn't matter. I'm going to set my Zoom to output English. Doesn't matter what the people are talking, and everyone can talk in their native tongue. We're going to, in real time, you're not even going to notice. He's in French, he's in Spanish, he's in Mandarin. I hear English, right? And vice versa. They forget that I don't speak Mandarin, right? The level of interactivity and collaboration moving forward is going to be nuts. And I think that there's going to be a level of unlock and GDP that is going to be incredible. And I think, did we talk about having a personal AI?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so I can describe that for the rest. So basically, I think we are 3 to 5 years out from each of us having a personal AI that sees what hears what you hear and is helping you with your day. And I'm able to say, "Hey Joe," because that's what I name mine. "Who's that French guy I talked to? We talked about his daughter. He brought up that book." That's sufficient context for Joe to say, "Yes, you spoke to Pierre August 6th. He's Belgian, not French, but I see why you would say that. But the book was this. Would you like me to buy it?" And I'll say, "Yeah, buy the book and send Pierre a note." Just extended RAM on all of our interactions. And then it gets nuts because it's retroactive. So Joe opts into my alma maters, my clubs, my groups, my churches, whatever. And Joe says, "Hey, Roy, see you're joining XYZ Corp. Would you like me to opt in?" I'll say, "Yeah, please opt in. You and Jacob love to go surfing. You and Bob love Brooklyn. You and whatever he starts connecting the dots. And the magic day is when I'm minding my own business, doing work, and Joe says, "Hey, Roy, a fellow alum just posted a job that's perfect for you." I don't know the alum. I'm not looking for a job, but I got this agent. And I think that substrate, which is basically a clearing network of supply and demand, is gonna unlock magic. Like it's just gonna be incredible because it has access to a level of interactivity and collaboration, going back to your question, that is just unprecedented. I'll be at work and say, "Hey Joe, I just talked to a guy in e-commerce marketplaces. Do we have anyone who knows anything about that?" And Joe says, "Yeah, Jim in the Cincinnati office worked at eBay for 10 years. Actually, his wife works there now." That would be impossible. That doesn't exist somewhere. It's not, but Joe can immediately look at my entire network, look who's employed at the company, look fully at all their LinkedIn profiles and go, "Jim, eBay, wife at eBay." Boom. Like the level of clearing of need of that collaboration is going to go through the roof. It's going to be crazy.
And the ideal output would be that we are in our conversations and our relationships, we're more value add as much as we can. We're more aware, we're more compassionate. If, for example, conversations with your significant other, conversations with your family members, like having a different perspective, right? Instead of just, "Hey, how was your day?"
Literally, I would love to have more RAM to just retain. I wake up and Joe says, "Hey, Griffin, my son, has a chemistry test today. Wish him luck." Blah, blah, blah. There's just the ability to enhance, to deepen and broaden all of our interactions. It's nuts. It's just going to, and people go, "Oh God, that's a privacy nightmare." I'm like, is it really? Because it's probably going to be locked down anyway, right? I actually think Apple's in the perfect position. Apple has access to my email, my calendar, my Apple in my device, and Apple doesn't sell me. Apple sells hardware and software, right? There'll be other versions. There'll be a Google for Gemini. There's an extension on Chrome to disable Gemini because Gemini is now integrated into everything on your Chrome browser. Wow. Avoiding Gemini is hard already. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And by the way, the only thing that's holding up, Joe, is hardware. And everyone's working on it. Like it's going to be some sort of glasses that see what you see and hear what you hear, like that. But that's what the Humane Pin was about. That's what the Rabbit device is about. You go to CES this year, there's dozens of companies basically trying to crack that nut that I'm talking about, that is basically present in your day. And Facebook has those big black, everything's bad now, but it's going to get smaller and tighter and lighter. There's a movie called Swan Song on Apple TV Plus. The movie itself is interesting. I thought it's about cloning and blah, blah, blah. I'd say it's sci-fi for sure. It's a near sci-fi. But the reason I bring it up is in the movie, everyone has contact lenses and earpieces that are powered by body heat. So literally they're off when they're out, they're on when they're in, and they overlay everything. You're in a full XR world. Your calendar can pop up, your email can pop up, you can have a video call, like blah, blah, blah. Like it's Apple Vision Pro, but in a contact lens, right? So clearly the technology is not there yet. We're going that way. We're
Yeah.
on exponential curves everywhere.
And how, in many cases, sci-fi begins to lead the way for the way that we think about things. Because someone they're like, I want to make a series. And they just went and sat down and they said, what's the craziest thing we could think of? And sometimes it's stuff that not even entrepreneurs are thinking about because it's just a different license, there's a different lens that they're able to see things through. But
Look, when I was a kid, sci-fi was when you approach the door, it opened automatically. Star
yeah,
Trek, when it went fishing, fishing, it was like, that's not impressive to anybody. Also, when you had a communicator, it would flip open and say, yeah, that was like, what my kids are not impressed by either of those things. And anyway, they'd be like, why would you be impressed by that? Right. I had to explain what a long distance call was to my teenagers. What does distance have to do with it? I'm like, it's like a different time, right? But again, sci-fi, when they made Star Trek, the fact that the door, and by the way, in Star Trek, there was a guy who was like, closing the door. But that was like, we're on a constant. I wrote a little paper called Exponential Everywhere. There are exponential curves all over the place. It's not just processing power. It's units of solar. It's the cost and everything. Processing, doing your DNA, you name it. Like I'm happy to share it with whoever wants it, but it's just crazy how fast things are going. And we basically have entered the elbow, and it's only going to get more vertical from here.
so you wrote that on a newsletter or?
Nah, I was saying things and my team was like, could you write that down? I'm like, yeah. And I ended up writing like a 9-page paper just on why there are exponential curves everywhere. It's just, I didn't, and then it got shared. And then someone I shared it with, actually, I sent him to PDF. He dropped it into Notebook LM. And Notebook LM did a podcast on it, which was crazy. Yeah, it was super fun. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
Because I ask because we can include it in the links for the show.
Oh, sure.
Sure. They can cap that. There's 3 different angles that I think are very interesting for us to go down. One is just the product side. And you mentioned how there's a lot of different companies and organizations that are out there that are trying to do the wearable. They're trying to do the next thing. Are a lot of these too early? Or what is the true gap from your understanding in these becoming successful and reaching their commercialization point? Because in my understanding, a lot of them really have not in any, right? They're just supported by investors and things like that. And
every time there's a Cambrian explosion, right? That is almost the definition of these things, like where there's way too many, evolution spits out way too many varieties, but then eventually it hones in at what works and what doesn't work. At the moment, hardware is the hard problem, but it's also connectivity and storage. If I'm storing video of everything you do, that's a lot of storage. So it's about compression. It's about, is it going over 5G or LTE or Wi-Fi, or there's a whole bunch of, and then the form factor alone is a huge issue and challenge, right? And there will always be this peak and trough where there's an explosion of options and then 1 or 2 or 3 come out as really good. But that doesn't guarantee them forever either. Things change over time. And it's, the reality is it's about understanding the user and making it painless and seamless. Apple didn't invent the smartphone, right? There were plenty of smartphones before Apple. People tend to forget them. But across the piece, Kodak invented the digital camera, but they didn't go run with it because their core business was around the film and the paper. So there's constantly, it's hard to predict winners and losers, but there's always going to be a lot of players because there are people who are hungry and go, yeah, we can do this, but doing it right and meeting the user where they are. And by the way, you never know. Microsoft bailed out Apple. People don't remember, but Apple was about to go under and Bill Gates bailed them out. Tesla was broke for a while. There's all sorts of ebbs and flows of these things, and there'll be lots of competitors and options, and some of them will merge with each other, and some of them will decide, what? We're good at hardware design. We suck at marketing and blah, blah, blah. So they'll collaborate. Like, you guys, we love your branding and everything, but our hardware is better. How about whatever? There'll be all sorts of things that happen and evolve over time.
Mm-hmm. And so even if, to make a principle there or a takeaway for people is, even if you're on the greatest rocket ship, and let's say that's Tesla, you're still going to go up. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have crashes. It probably is not going to feel like the greatest rocket ship. It's like when you have to continuously execute, persist, find a different way, find the right way. Because I go back to one of the things you said sparked the thought. And it's a quote from Steve Jobs. He says, you don't need to ask the market what they want because they probably don't know what they want. You just need to know exactly what the market wants. But in a lot of cases, if you just take that bit of advice and you go test it in your market, you might fail. And in fact, you probably should fail at least a couple times till you get that right thing, but just know it then.
I mean, that world is a great example. Apple is a closed ecosystem, very expensive, closed hardware and software, but opened up an app store. Android, open source, sent it out, massive customization. You can do anything on an Android phone that you want, but that's a different model. If you look at the OS of Android versus the OS of Apple, almost everyone updates Apple. There's very few people on older versions of the OS. It's people tend to be on the most recent of the last two, give or take. Android, there's an infinite number of versions out there because each operator has their own push of the code, their own code, like blah, blah, blah. Different strategies, different things happen. Some people will tell you Android's way more successful than Apple. It's got more installations. That's true. It's at a very different price point with very different devices. Like again, there's always a range of strategies and approaches, and every company has to decide what works for them and what they're trying to achieve.
And to go to another topic here of collaboration, but also relationships, is right now we're in a Zoom call, and I would say we're in a very high state of flow. Right? We're in a very high state of flow. We're a good conversation, and we talked about, I think, in our first call about this digital world collaboration, collaborating across age groups. And one thing that like my primitive brain says when I'm on a Zoom, or at least it did back when, now it's all Zoom, is just maybe a bit of overload or overwhelm. I'm looking at myself and I'm talking to this person, I'm doing this thing, and then we can get in person and we're used to that environment. That environment just works. So I'm curious about your thoughts about how we collaborate effectively across age groups and are able to create more of these high flow conversations in our business, because that's a lot of times what creates the commitment, the conviction, and the dedication for the execution to occur to the degree that it needs to be successful.
Yeah, no,
I could play in that as well.
yeah, I think there's a big unknown at the moment that is concerning. So COVID's a great example. So COVID for my generation was great to a certain extent because I shouldn't have put it that way. What I mean is being in my home office and removing a commute was a benefit. I get to have dinner with the family. The flexibility of that is great. If you're in your early 20s and you're in New York and you share an apartment with 4 people and you only use that apartment for sleeping, and there's only enough room for 4 people sleeping, all of a sudden that becomes a 4-person office. There are people having calls in the tub. And so there is a generational problem. In fact, I just had this conversation with someone about some of consulting firms replacing some of the junior work with AI and whatnot. And I think that's missing the trick completely around apprenticeship and how you learn as a young professional is by watching other people and participating and making mistakes and making little mistakes, lots of them in front of people, and them going, no, you don't want to do it this way. Oh no, that's good, but you want to change it. All these little micro learning interactions have evaporated for a lot of people, right? Do I think that there's a huge space for remote and hybrid work? Certainly. Do I worry that we're going to miss, if we migrate completely to that, there's an entire learning phase that is being changed. But the truth is, we're going to figure it out. That's human by the definition. If I had to define humanity, we're going to figure it out. Like literally 100 years ago, most of us were on the farm. 75 years ago, most of us were in the factory. 50 years ago, most of us were in the office. And now you're in your house and I'm in my house, and it can be pretty effective, right? And by the way, it doesn't eliminate the past. Still farms, still factories, still offices, these things migrate over time and different. And I also tell people it's different by team. There are some teams You separate them into different rooms and houses, not so good. Other teams, they're being way more effective. The people who go into a flow state and interrupting them trips them up. Being in the home office is great. They can turn off notifications and focus on the problem for an hour, 2 hours, whatever. It varies dramatically, but I am worried about the apprenticeship part because a lot of the knowledge economy and the service economy which is what we tend to think of apprenticeship in the old physical. In the factory, there was an apprenticeship required to understand how to use the machines and understand the process. But there's apprenticeship across the piece in all sorts of knowledge and service economy. And that losing that to some degree is a little worrisome. It's not clear to me yet what the answer is to that.
Mhm.
But it could be common workspaces. There are people who have a common Zoom environment. Our team collaborating on Zoom Workplace, but on Miro or whatever shared docs. You and I are in the same notes document in Google right now. Like the ability to collaborate is pretty substantial and it is digitized in large part.
Mm.
I still worry about the micro learnings, the little, I don't know. We'll
The
see.
mirror neurons as well.
Totally.
I'm sure in some degree it definitely happens over Zoom and whatnot, but the full spectrum of that psychological impression or the subconscious impression that can occur when you're in a physical room with somebody.
And social life too. When you're in your 20s, a lot of your social life is work oriented, right? Like you're getting most of and a huge percentage of people, it's changed dramatically. I just saw a chart on this, but you used to meet your partner or spouse or whatever in those environments, or at least in the industry environments. Now there's so much online, everything's changed in that regard as well. But yeah, but look, it's a phase shift. We are in the middle of a phase shift. It's going to be uncomfortable. People hate change. People hate the unknown. And by the way, some people like who are badmouth people who are uncomfortable with change and dynamics and all of that. And I constantly have to remind them that that's pretty much the definition of evolution, right? The ones who were not fearful of the unknown, who ran towards the strange sound or ran towards the unknown thing, they generally got eaten or stung or fell off the cliff or whatever, right? We are the result of the people who were somewhat scared and ran. That's how evolution works, right? So you can't blame people for being change averse. The change averse tend to be the survivor.
And of the essentially, you mentioned the dating apps and meeting somebody in person. Like I had to make a conscious choice that I was not going to use a dating app to meet my significant other. Like that was something that, like, through innovation, technology made it easier to be able to find dating partners who you want to go out with through dating apps. So when that format is created, you have to make a conscious choice. It's so there's potentially something to be gleaned there for the rest of the conversation around this collaboration. But I would say for myself,
Sometimes making things harder is better. Like it's worth the effort. Sometimes it's just harder. It's hard to predict. That's the crazy thing. This chart I saw again 100 years ago, the vast majority of pairings were through family and church. Like that was how it happened and migrated over time. Now the vast majority, it's 65, 70% are online. They met online. There's some, whether it was a dating app or a community or something, it was some online thing where they first encountered each other.
mhm,
That's interesting. It's like that's a different world. That's totally different. Yeah.
those are the paths and the human behaviors. We adopt technology and create technology on top of these things that are already existing. And is it truly better one way or the other? Is one worse? It's just like preference at some point, and we all have to make choices.
Yeah. But yeah, my kids are in a very different world than I was at their age.
So one of the kind of insights that we've got here is just the best use of artificial intelligence would be that it can make us better humans. It can give us extra RAM, as you say, to be able to have better relationships. And then one port that came up, and it's a new thought I would say in my mind that you introduced, is through this more digitized world, we actually can have better personalization and connected to that early statement you made, that personal approach.
Mhm.
So there's some people who are going to have they need to find their personal approach in life. You're good at this, you enjoy this, but then through this digital world, the transformations and the collaboration, how that's shifted. Somebody who thrives better from sitting at home and not having distractions can be a better employee in your organization, or vice versa. As you're looking forward, what can we do as leaders to build better teams, have better collaboration, and utilize AI to set us up for success in our businesses?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, on the collaboration front, what we're doing is meeting transparency, right? The ability to interrogate all of that unstructured data in collaboration, right? And little miracles happen, right? So, for instance, you can have an intern who made this brilliant comment that wasn't relevant for the group that they're in, but was really insightful strategically for the company. And then all of a sudden, the CEO goes, "Has anyone mentioned this topic?" And it goes, "Yeah, that intern." And the CEO now says to the intern, "Hey, we're putting a Tiger team together on that. Would you like to join the Tiger team for that?"
Mm,
Would never happen. The little thumbs up came up because of my fingers. I'm right, but that wouldn't have happened, right? That's just an impossibility in the current environment.
mm,
Another one that comes to mind, you could have a senior team thinking about M&A and they're going to buy this other team, this other company. Now they would be able to say, "Hey, what does our company think of that company?" You might find out that overall they fear and respect them. They think they're really good and they worry about them as a competitor. Or you might find out that they think they're bozos. Like, and in the bozo scenario, you're not going to buy that company because the merger would be hard. But in the fear and respect, that might actually work pretty well. Like blah blah blah. Like this. So there's a deeper level. Being able to interrogate piles and piles of language, large language models, is really interesting and good. On the flip side, it's in the interpersonal interactions, we need to understand how people work, what we're trying to get out of them, right? Like and what's effective not only for an individual but for a team. As I said, the it may be that the team is more effective in person, and so this team needs to be in proximity. But the unlock of not proximity, so all of it, this is the crazy thing. We tend to wash over it, but 50 years ago, my hiring pool was 50 miles around my office. That was it. This is everybody I got to choose from.
mm,
That has gone away. You might find a star performer in whatever the vertical you need them to be, a graphic design, blah, 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 whatever it is, anywhere, anywhere. That's nuts, really. Like even that unlock is pretty huge. But again, then it's culture and how you interact with people and trust. I'm a big fan of Daniel Pink, and there's a book of his called Drive that we abide by, and it's called AMP: Autonomy, Mastery, and Purpose. That why do people hop out of bed excited in the morning? Those are the three things that give you drive. Autonomy. I have I have a say in what matters and what I'm doing and how I do it. Mastery, I'm confident in my ability to execute on that decision. And purpose, we have a shared purpose. We know what we're trying to do together. And when a person wakes up with AMP, with autonomy, mastery, and purpose in front of them, it's hard to sleep because they're excited. All
mm.
right. And I often tell that to people I work with. I'm like, beware what you enjoy in front of me,
Yeah.
because I'm going to give you more of that. And if I see you suffering on something, I'm going to give it to him because he loves it. Like we're all different. And look, it doesn't mean there's not going to be parts of work you might not enjoy, but you have to do, like your expense reports or something. But for the most part, you should be excited to do what you do because you have mastery around it. It's fun doing what you're good at, and you have autonomy on how you get it done. And we have a shared purpose that we're all aligned and we know what we're doing. And so I want to give people more of what they enjoy doing, and I want to remove what they don't enjoy doing and give it to that other person who has the exact opposite. They're like, "Oh God, I don't want to speak in front of an audience, but I like to do this accounting." And the other one's like, "Please put me in front of an audience. Please don't make me work with the numbers," like blah, 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 like whatever it is. And that's another thing that it's important to recognize and appreciate. You're not trying to, I tell people, for all the generalist stuff that I said about David Epstein, I'm not trying to you're not trying to be great in everything. You should be great at what you like doing. And there tends to be high correlation, right? Doing it and good at it tends to be very correlated. There's very few people who love or who are really good at something they hate doing. Like it's just not because you don't practice it at the end of the day.
Yeah. And it seems like underpinning to a lot of this and the application of artificial intelligence and better collaboration, it's a lot about making the unconscious conscious and this unification of knowledge that occurs once we are able to tap into the content and the context that exists across all the different conversations. We can have more, and this would be the action step would be have more of these open conversations instead of realizing or thinking that person doesn't enjoy doing it, but that doesn't matter. They need to do it anyways because that's their
Yeah.
job. That is an unconscious thing that that person doesn't like doing that. We should have an open conversation. How do we like collaborating? How are you succeeding in this environment? What are the things that create that moment? If you create more of that feeling in your organization, that hard to sleep, they're so excited it's hard to sleep, you're going to have a winning organization.
People love problem solving. People love to do hard things and do them well. That's for sure. There's no question. That's a human trait. And you're right. It's fundamentally about transparency. We now have the processing power to get levels of transparency in our interactions that are just unprecedented. And one of our things is we're going to give you a score. Like you're going to have a collab score that's not only personal. Here's my collab score. So me across all the meetings I have, but a score for the meeting, a score for the if we do it right, you'll brag about it on LinkedIn. You'll say, here's because at the moment, everything's introspective. Here's my Myers-Briggs. Here's my DISC score. Here's my Ocean. It's me. Like our LinkedIn is all about me and what I have achieved. Now I'm going to be able to say, how do you collaborate? Here's a score on your ability to collaborate with others. And companies are going to say, look at our collab score. You want to work here. It's a great place to work. Look at how well we collaborate. And again, I don't think that was possible before LLMs and the ability to interrogate large piles of unstructured data.
Mhm. And what about what can this do in terms of responsibility and accountability? Because as we collaborate, only so much can happen in a meeting. So what about as we move into the next steps, the actual execution with our teams? What are some things that we can use to be better at that stage as well?
Yeah. So AI as a tool for you as an individual is again unprecedented, right? But it's also deeply misunderstood. And again, when I say AI now, LLMs, and LLMs, I probably said this to you when we first spoke, but they threw out half a century of GUI. We went back to an MS-DOS blinking cursor command line. Not sure who thought that was a good idea. And then we forgot decades of query response search engines where you see a chat, an empty box, and the first thing people did in 2023 was ask it a factual question and get the wrong answer. And then the last, artificial sounds fake, not real, and intelligence implies thoughtfulness and correctness, which makes the wrong answer seem even worse, right? The truth is LLMs are augmented imagination. They expand the possibility set and they collapse time. They're a time compression machine and an option expansion machine, but they're not trying to be right. They're not, they don't have cut and paste. And unfortunately, the first few years now, it's been oversold as an end product machine. People literally think they're going to hit enter and hit print. And I'm like, no, it's a beginning product machine. It gets the ball rolling. It might get you 50, 60, 70% of the way there. And we're in this weird scenario where if I came up to you and said, hey, I got this thing, it'll get you 50, 60, 70% of the way there. You'd be like, great.
Yeah.
But instead, I've said, it's 100%. And then you get 50, 60, 70, and you're like, yeah, it's not very good. Well, and the way I sum it up, I'm like, just because it can't do everything doesn't mean it can't do anything. And as a tool for an individual, it's magic because you can iterate now at a scale was totally. So for instance, in the knowledge economy, doesn't matter what you're working on, a marketing plan, a pitch deck, a podcast piece, whatever it is, it's pretty linear. We would start with a rough draft and pretty linearly get to a final draft. Why? Because we're not rude. I don't ask my team for 10, 12 first drafts. And now I can. I'm like, give me 10 drafts from 5th grade level to PhD level. Okay, this one, I like that. Blow that out. Oh, page 2. That's the tone I'm really looking for. Like the ability to iterate and iterate and iterate is unprecedented and something you would never do to a human. Like I would never tell my intern or my marketing team to give me 10 versions. If you did, they look at you like, you fucking bastard. Like what? I'm not doing AI. No problem. Happy to do that. But so this is the other thing, like context really more than before, context matters. It's incredible how important it is. What do I mean by that? You and I are auto calibration machines. We look at each other, we hear each other, we see profiles, and we adjust. If one of us was a not native English speaker, we would speak differently now. We would have different tone, cadence, speed, vocabulary. And so we're in a constant state of adjusting. If I'm talking to a kid versus an older person versus whoever, I'm constantly adjusting. AI has no ability to do that, has no idea who it's talking to. So what does it do? I alluded to this earlier. It meets you at the mean. It treats you as if you have an IQ of 100, and it acts like it has an IQ of 100. It's not so impressive at the end of the day, but it can be whoever you want it to be. And it can do whatever you need it to do, but you got to tell it. So you can say, you are a genius marketeer in this market addressing this vertical. Like, hell, if the person you want it to be exists and there's plenty on them, you can tell it to be that person. I want you to be Ogilvy, I want you to be whoever it is that is well known in your space, is a leader. I want you to be McLennan or what, pick a name. It doesn't matter. It can be whoever you want it to be. And it also needs as much context. I tell people on the 80-20, spend 80% of your time and effort on context. Here's who you are. Here's all the background information about the client. Here's all the background information about us. Like, here's who I am. Here's my background. Here's like, blah, blah, fill it up. Here's some PDFs. Here's some YouTubes. Give it as much context as possible about the problem set.
Mm.
And after you spend 80% of your time on that, then say, okay, here's the problem that I'm trying to solve, given everything I've just given you. Oh my God. It's like, between just saying, here's the problem, and that, there's just not even comparable. And then, by the way, the 20% left is about feedback. It's a feedback loop. It gives you the first answer. You go, okay, this was really good. This, no, I'm not looking for that. I want more of this. And feedback. It's like an intern. It doesn't know. So you got to keep telling it, that was good. That was bad. That was good. Yeah, more of this, less of that. Like feedback. It's a constant feedback loop. And that's how you, and when you use AI that way, oh my God, the output can be just amazing because it's going to learn as you interact with it. What you like, what you want, who you are, and what the target market is.
On that note too, there's a lot of cases where 60% is good. And what I mean is I'll work with people, right? To go back to the real questions, how do we help people be better and collaborate better and execute better, the better term. It's in teams today. It's okay. Let me get back to you in a few days on that. But in reality, it's if we just pump that into ChatGPT, we'll have 60% of it done, and we'll already know it'll already be structured, and we just need to add like an extra 5-10 minutes. We thought it was going to take days, but really it was just like, let's just put it out there. And that connects to your earlier point about execution, right? So like that execution drive still exists, and now it's just the feedback loop is faster and shorter. It's quicker.
And also I tell people what's magic is that it can be whoever you want it to be, not just like an expert in what you're trying to do, but so you can tell it, you are my target market. And you're in this country, in this city, with this many employees. Like if it's a B2B, you're like this company. Here's the URL of a company that's perfect. Here's all the URLs of all of our existing clients. Look at it through the lens of all of our existing clients. That's or consumer. You are a mother of 3 in India who works in this. Describe the ICP. What's the ideal customer profile? Just tell it. You're that. Okay, how do you react to this? What do you think? Is this good? Is it bad? What would make it resonate with you more? That's magic. We couldn't do that before, right? There's a lot of marketing was a bit of guesswork because guess what? I'm the marketeer, but I'm not the target market. So I'm thinking, I think you have a machine now who can be it, right? And give you a reaction and ask it and interrogate it. Here's all of our existing clients. Given that, what other companies do you think we should be talking to? And on the ability to do, and then the other thing I should say is the default setting has to change, which is what you were alluding to right there. Go to AI first, not last. AI is not spitting out the end product. AI is at the beginning of the process, and then the humans are going to take it over the line. So, we say this is very much, people are afraid, but we think it's a humanizing moment because it's going to augment at the top, make you more productive, effective, prolific, and automate at the bottom. Anything that we would call busy work, we're going to give that to the machine. And if it's tedious and boring and dull and repetitive, Now, if your entire job is that job may go away.
Mm.
But the truth is, most of those jobs that are tedious, boring, repetitive are suffering. The average tenure in a call center is around a year because people just can't take the abuse. They're like, oh, it's so boring. It's so tedious. It's so like humans are not good for that. We are good at creative problem solving. Anything that's rote, repetitive, tedious, boring, that's machine work.
Mm.
So this is a humanizing moment. We finally have the ability to give a machine. And by the way, that's what we did in our factories too. If the whole thing was just taking if you're just moving the thing forward and backward, the guy who does that job wants to kill himself every day. He's, oh my God. And so now we're like, you fix that machine and actually you're responsible for blah, blah, blah. We evolve over time and
Yeah.
people will lose jobs and there will be new jobs.
Reminds me of Freakonomics. You ever read that book?
Totally.
I might have it behind me, but basically
Yeah.
we'll hear the headline, 20% of jobs will be gone.
Yeah.
And what we don't realize is, yes, it's 20% of jobs that suck and nobody likes and actually create suffering.
Totally. No, look, I only half jokingly say, look, 100 years ago, there were thousands of guys in New York City who shoveled horse shit. Had to. There was a lot of horse shit in New York City 100 years ago. The car came around and those jobs went away.
Yep. And then there was probably a lot of those guys that said, oh, I've always shoveled horse shit.
Yeah.
My
Look, I do think productivity is going to change dramatically. I think there's going to be an opportunity to make life better. And maybe we finally get that UBI possibility. And there have been plenty of UBI experiments where it was an explosion. It was fantastic. Once people didn't have to worry about food, housing, clothing, the creativity exploded and new businesses were formed because of it. So you never know. Yeah.
And to build for an actionable item for leaders, it seems that you to really take that term, the humanizing moment, which I really think you've communicated pretty well throughout our podcast here, is the real humanizing moment of the technology and how we can help people be better on our teams is to work with them directly to the point where they are able to utilize this for their role, their position in the organization, and then really work with that person on a human side to engineer and figure out what are the highest ways that they can add value to the company. Just that the little bit of extra persistence, which I think we miss sometimes, is, you know what, let me just put everything aside and figure out what's going to make Jim very successful in his job. And you go to Jim and you realize, hey, Jim, I know this thing was taking you 4 or 5 days. What if we just plug it in here and you show him and you get that light bulb moment and Jim goes, oh, wow, you're right. I can turn this around way faster. And all of a sudden Jim can focus on other things.
And again, heavily depends on roles, objectives, management styles, like blah, blah, blah. There's going to be a full range for sure. But yeah, and this is the other thing, like this idea, and maybe I'm too optimistic. I don't think so, but people like being productive, full stop. Are there a few percentage points of people who are like trying to squeeze out value that they didn't earn? Maybe, but most people want to be productive. Like they want to contribute. They want it. Again, deep genetics. We are social creatures who want to help make things better, move the group faster, blah, blah, blah. I think we have to think best of people versus thinking that they're trying to screw us or whatever. The truth is you can make that a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you treat people like that, then they'll act like that. It's as simple as that.
And I think one good point to note also is to get to what works. So when it comes to execution, when it comes to building your business or taking advantage of some cutting edge technology, you just need to get to what works. And the example I have of this is, so 6 months ago, the data process for how we generate new leads is now changed because ChatGPT released a new update where it can do the data and it can actually edit the sheets and do things. And so that process has totally changed. But as a business, you just need to figure out, get to what works. You're never going to be able to be like, I know exactly that in 6 months, this new tech is going to come out. It's going to change everything. That will come. We just need to focus on, as an organization, just getting to what works with everybody, for everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if you like things that don't change, this is not the time. Like we're in continuous change now and way faster than previous. I mean, that whole an exponential curve is real. That is not, it's no joke. It's no joke.
So I'd love to drop a link to that. You'll share it with me. I'll drop it.
Sure, I'll share it with you. Yeah.
You don't strike me too much of a guy who thinks about legacy that much. Obviously, you're living a life to create a wonderful legacy, but I want to add a point to why I say that. There was a quote from Mike Tyson. Did you hear this?
I don't know which one. I don't know the quote yet.
So someone asked him, "What do you think about legacy, Mike?" And he goes, "My legacy is nothing. My legacy means nothing to me. All that matters is that I'm alive and here right now." This was he was going to go fight Jake Paul or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
he so. But if you asked him earlier in his career, his take on legacy would have been different. I want to be remembered. I want to be powerful. I want to be the
Right.
baddest.
Right.
And so I've actually that was the first time I've heard someone say that. But what I mean is, as a guy who doesn't strike me that thinks too much about legacy because you're always executing, is what I'm saying, and out there creating. So
Actually, you've hit upon one of my two favorite quotes, and that one is the journey is the reward. Like this, I've never been a person who thinks I'll suffer now for that reward later. It's not that you don't invest in the future. It's not that you're not being an idiot. I'm not saying that, but you shouldn't be suffering for some long-term thing. There can be short-term suffering. Working out is short-term suffering so that I live longer. That's great. Like you're not being an idiot is my point. The journey is the reward means like you should be enjoying the hopping out of bed statement that I said earlier. Like you should be enjoying your day. If you're in a period where like you're dreading, like dread should not exist. This is the point. If you're dreading something repeatedly, it's time for a change. Right. And you should be enjoying the journey is the reward because you don't know when you're going to step outside and get hit by a bus. Like this whole, and again, that goes to the legacy thing. Yeah, maybe there's legacy, maybe there's not, but you're trying to enjoy the moments as they pass. Be present. I think that acknowledging that being present is important, and that's where satisfaction and joy and happiness comes from. Yeah, I don't tend to think very far ahead. Not that but I'm because I think that the moments that because life is short.
right,
Life is short. Yeah.
just immersed in the joy of the moment, and that speaks to a lot of that polymath. You got to put yourself out there. You got to
Yeah.
try different things. You got to take different inputs, and just
Yeah.
when you're so immersed in that, it's clear that what you're creating is going to ultimately be something fantastic and wonderful. But you're not. You can't live out there.
Which actually relates to the second quote when I said be present. Like the second quote is you'll never find time for anything. If you want time, you have to make it. And I just love that about the English language. Like we say find time and we say make time. And I do think that those are two different kinds of people. And I tell folks like if you can't find time, if you said to me, I can't find the time to do blah, you don't want to do it. It's as simple as that. If you wanted to do it, you would make time to do it. We are time producers. In my worldview, you are a time production machine. You make sufficient time to do what you think is important and what you need to do. There's no such thing as there's not timeline. Time's not lying around. You're not going to find it. You're not going to find time to do your workout or whatever it is you don't want to do. You're making, and that's the thing. It's the conscious act of appreciating and recognizing that you are making the time to do what you're doing right now. And if you're not making the time to do that other thing, guess what? That's your choice. You're in control of that. You make as much time as you need to get done when you need to get done.
So as we're going forward as leaders, making time for the right things. This has been a phenomenal conversation, Roy. Of course, we can keep going for hours, but it's been a pleasure. So yeah, I'll make sure that we'll share some of your details and information, but how can people best get a hold of you if they want to learn more about NextCollabs and potentially?
Yeah, I'm not unlike you, a fairly unique name. You drop the space and you can find me anywhere. I'm Roy Vella at Gmail will get to me. Roy Vella on LinkedIn, / Roy Vella, Twitter, wherever. NextCollabs is nextcollabs.io, a little more different, but you'll find me on LinkedIn or email is fine. And yeah, happy to chat. And this was fun, Jacob.
Perfect.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being on. Episode 40 is officially in the books.
My pleasure. All right, good. Take care.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.